AgileBear user story splitting video. My name's Nigel Baker. I'm an Agile coach and certified Scrum trainer for nearly over a decade now, and I've been involved in the Agile movement for nearly 15 years from this point. I've seen a load of interesting ways of splitting stories and picked up a few tips and tricks along the way, and I thought, do you know what, I'll share them back with the community, and that's what this video is all about. Apologies for the production quality, I haven't put a lot of money into this, but hopefully it'll be useful for all of you out there. What I'm going to do is work my way through a variety of techniques and hopefully give them a little bit of explanation on each of them to help you take this forward in your workplace. Anyway, enough talking about me, let's get on with the show. The first thing we should consider with story splitting is why. Why are we splitting these stories down? I hear a lot of people say, well, we need to get our stories smaller so they fit in a sprint. And I guess that's kind of true, but that's not really a good reason, is it? It's sort of just following the framework slavishly. So instead, I want to just quickly talk about why we normally split stories down. And the main reason is normally to save money, or at least to reduce complexity. Can we actually throw some of these stories away? Or at least some aspect of the story away, while still keeping the value. Wouldn't that be amazing? The Agile principle of simplicity, maximizing the amount of work not done. So every time with the story, when we're chopping them up, we should always be asking, which bits can go in the recycling bin, and which bits are we actually going to work on?
Of course, saving effort isn't the only reason for smaller stories. There is also the benefit of realizing value earlier. And we can get feedback quicker with smaller units of valuable work, both team and wider stakeholder contributions. So all in all, smaller stories are a win-win in most situations.
Technology splitting. So, we've got our story, it's big, we want to break it down. So let's make up an example story off the top of my head. As a user, I want to register on your website so that I can access a variety of your products and services. Not a great user story by any imagination and could be fairly big. So how do people break this down? Well, one classic way is to split it by technology. Now for me, this normally means when someone gets together with their colleagues and goes, right, we've got this registration story, we're going to have to break it up to make it smaller. So why don't you do the front end, I'll do the database, Bob over there can do the Java, Sandra, she's quite good with APIs, she can come up with that. We need someone to do the JavaScript, maybe Krishnaj. Sorted. Or not, as the case may be. What's wrong with that type of split? Well, the fact is, it's the last type of split you can make with a story. Because all those technical lumps and bumps, database, Java, JavaScript, front end, whatever, those are all technical tasks really, and you're going to have to do all of them to get any value back in that story. That's the worst type of story splitting in my opinion, because you're breaking it down into lumps of no value, and you've got to complete all those lumps until you get any value back. Generally in Scrum, we tend to leave those breakdowns to the last possible moment, normally sprint planning. What you will find is with newer teams, they'll make them a lot earlier, and that limits their flexibility. What's another word for flexibility? Agility. Implementation splits. So, we've understood now that splitting by technology may not be the best idea. So what other ways are there to split? Well, you could try implementation splitting. I've seen this called a variety of different names, but it's basically when someone says, right, we've got a epic here, it's I want to buy a shoe in your online shoe shop. So they break it down into registering, logging in, selecting a shoe, viewing the shoe, paying for the shoe, shoe is delivered. Okay? Now, if we broke it down in that order, doing the stories, well, register, then log in, then view a shoe, then pick a shoe, then buy a shoe, The trouble is, we only get value when we actually deliver the shoe to the customer. Every one of those steps along the way, actually, great step for feedback, great step for learning, but we probably can't launch it. And if we did launch it, we wouldn't get much value from it. The value only comes when the shoe arrives in the customer's hands. So what may be nice is to find something that we can actually split up in a slightly different way. Now, Richard Lawrence, who famously came up with the user story cheat sheet, a document I'm going to link down there in the comments, he came up with a great example that I love. It's something on the lines of, as a journalist, I want to submit a news story to my news website so that we're never wrong for long. Now, this type of story breaks down to a variety of different steps. You know, you have to edit the story in the online editing tool, then it's got to be sent to some sort of sub-editor who's going to correct your English and your grammar, make sure you put those semicolons in the right place. Then it'll go to the legal department. Gosh, got to get legal involved, haven't we? We don't want to publish any story that might potentially not be true. We could get sued out of existence. So we've got to get the lawyers involved. Then, a queue. Now, why do we put a story in a queue? Well, frankly, if we launch all the stories when the journalists have finished them, the chance are we'll get a massive blip at 5 o'clock as they all dash out to the pub. And you know what? There are some stories that we want to get straight online, breaking news. But there are some stories that we just want to put out when acceptable. Maybe there's an embargo, so we're not allowed to say it until a certain time period. That happens with a lot of news stories. Or maybe just it's a standard puff piece that we want going out over the 24 hours of our news website to keep people interested. Either way, we'll stick it in a queue and then have it poll out to that queue periodically. And then of course the last part of the story is publish. You know, read all about it, the latest news. So, as we said before, an implementation split would be going down that list and it would be learning, feedback, right till the end when you finally get the actual value of the story. And that's why for me, implementation splitting isn't great. It's a bit of an amber warning for me. It's not terrible and it's a lot better than technology splitting, but it's not great. And the fact is a lot of Scrum teams get to that type of split and never leave that type of split. It's vertical-ish, it's valuable-ish, and that's good enough for them. Well, do you know what? It shouldn't be good enough for you. There are some better ways of splitting that I'd like to discuss now. ABBA. So, there's a type of split that I thought I invented, but like most splits, I didn't. It was invented by other people as well. That's why it's a classic splitting pattern. I called it ABBA. Now, why ABBA? Well, I once had someone suggest that meant advanced business benefit analysis, but I think that's a bit of a bluff. No, it's because of the famous ABBA song.
Money, 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 must be funny in the rich man's world.
Yeah, money, money, money. Show me the money, as they said in the film Jerry Maguire. Why don't we trace back from value and build up from there, rather than build towards value being the final step? So using that example Richard came up with, that user story example of journalists submitting a story onto a website, why not start with the publish part first? Money. Then we could do the WYSIWYG editor, the typing it in online part of the story, so we've got value. Then we could add the legal department, then we could add the sub-editor, and finally we could add the queue. So instead of it being learn, feedback, money, it goes money. I kind of like that. Now I think in that document down below, they call it workflow steps or something like that. Do you know what? The name actually doesn't matter. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. But I'm quite a fan of the ABBA split and the ABBA band. Simplex. So this is another type of splitting that I thought I came up with, genius Nigel, and yet actually everyone's been doing for over a decade. I call it simplex, and I stole that off a Dublin crossword, but I've seen it exist under a variety of other names, things like simple, complex, UI splitting, etc. The idea of simplex is what's the simplest thing that could possibly work? What's the simplest bit of the story we could split off and do? And then what is the complex aspects that we could add perhaps later? Now you can see this type of split in many different ways. I've seen it called a happy path split, when someone splits off the happy path of the functionality. If everything goes good, it does this. And then they just fail all errors to a generic error code, and then gradually build up that error workflow complexity over time. So it doesn't just say, computer says no. Or I've seen it as a UX split, where you have it, well, some people would say ugly pretty. I like to think more simple, complex. You know, we've got a basic user interface that's purely functional and does the job but has no bells and whistles, and then you could add the bells and whistles and the extra complexity a little bit later if needed. A classic split type that I find useful in many settings. What other types of splitting are there out there? Well, I'll tell you one I really like, the CRUD. No, not that type of CRUD. Create, read, update and delete. Splitting up some euphemisms in your stories. Maybe you've got the word manage in there or something, or the word set in there. What do you actually mean by set or manage? You know, I want to manage my order. Well, it could be I want to create an order, I want to read an order, I want to update my order, or I want to delete my order. So take that sort of euphemism, that sort of weasel word as we call it, and break it out into the classic CRUD formula. And in fact, that leads me directly onto a more generic split, which I call a language split. So a language split is when you get just those weaselly words in general. Someone comes up with a word saying, oh, must be pretty. What do you mean by pretty? Let's break that down. Or what do you mean by must be flexible? Flexible means 1,000 things to 1,000 different people, and we should probably work out what we mean by flexible. So take that word, analyze it a bit further, see what it actually means, break it out a little bit. So, as we aforementioned, CRUD is a type of language splitting, but there could be other language terms out there. What ones can you think of? Now, here's a story split that I really endorse, and I've always called it a syntax split. Let's say you've got a user story. As a customer, I want to register and log in so that I can access your services, or something as naff as that. Where's the syntax split in that? I can register and log in. I want to search and select. The and is a great split point there. I want to buy soup or a salad, to think of the famous Mike Cohen example. The or could be the split there, soup or salad. Maybe even commas. I want to search for someone on my online dating website via age, sex or location. Well, we could split on those commas, age, sex, location, and break those out into separate stories if we wish to do so. Performance splits. So a performance split is effectively when you take into account some sort of aspect of non-functionals and splitting it on that. Now, I'm not really a huge fan of some splits of that style. Could you imagine launching a website for 10 people by mistake when it needs to have the capacity for 1 million? Whoops. But what I do mean is perhaps maybe performing speed. So, hey, we're doing a search for train times. Maybe when I click the button for my train time search, it takes a few seconds to come back. It says, tick tock, just getting your results. Bink, and results come back. Those 3 seconds could be mildly annoying, but it's okay really. And then in the future, we could work out a way of doing that with sub-second response time. So we get it there, and then the next version is we get it there quick. For me, that's a reasonable type of performance splitting. So, what are spikes? A spike story for me is when you split off a bit of work to go and do some investigation. The output of a spike is learning, not value. Well, unless learning is value for you. But the idea is we have an unknown that we need to do some investigation. Maybe technology, maybe domain space. Either way, as a team, we're going to have to put on our Indiana Jones hats and go on a bit of an adventure into that unknown territory. But not for too long. This could go on forever if we let it. So most of us time box our spikes, 24 hours, 48 hours, that type of thing. But it's a type of story that we can have to do investigation. One caveat I would say is I do see many teams spike everything, and that's normally a bit of a symptom of something else. Maybe it's a fear that their estimates are going to be held to them, a bit of a commitment. Maybe it's a fear that if they don't fully understand what they're doing, they'll get told off. Maybe it's just the team really don't know anything about their product. Either way, those are all probable red flags that are bigger and broader than mere story splitting. Data splitting. Another way we can do this is splitting by data. So you've got a huge data set that you're trying to maneuver around in your product. Well, do you know what? Can we work with a smaller set of that data? Do you really need all those columns? Imagine you're running a dating website. You're catching 1,000 different attributes about their interests and their commonalities. Do you know what? Look at Tinder. Would a photo just do? Major effort splitting. This is another split that isn't great, but I think it's nice to have in your toolbox. It's when you struggle to break a story up evenly. Most of the good advice is if you're going to split stories and you're not splitting the third away, could you split it in general even blocks? Well, what if you can't? Maybe you're taking credit card payments, and the first type of payment you need to take is where all the work is, but then the subsequent types of credit card are quite easy. Maybe they're just configuration. So could we split our big story into, one big lump, the major effort, and then get some nice thin slices after it? I guess it's a reasonable way to get over big technical lumps, but again, I see some teams go too often to this well, and they use it as an excuse to keep their stories in quite large sizes for whatever reasons they have, and then sort of have a few nominal extra stories afterwards. So I can see it being useful in some situations, but I can also see it being a little bit of a amber flag that we should be concerned about if we use it too often. Actor splits. To be or not to be, that is the story. Or was it the question? Anyway, who cares? But one way of splitting you could take on is by splitting by the actor. Too many people use that first part of a user story, the famous Connextra formula, as a someone. I want something so that we achieve some result. Well, frankly, they waste the first 30% of that story. They just say, as a user, and that's then done. Well, could we actually be a bit more defined there? Maybe use some personas, and by doing so, perhaps we could split that out. Imagine a cash point or an ATM or a cash machine or a hole in the wall or a telebanco or whatever they're called in your country. As a user, I want to withdraw cash so that I can withdraw cash. Not great. But imagine this. As a student, I want to withdraw cash so that I can buy some baked beans from IT. Well, maybe then that student would like to have lower denomination numbers available from their cash point. Maybe they'd like to be able to go slightly over. As a gambler, I want to withdraw cash so that I can gamble. Or maybe they would want high denomination notes. £50 is the highest in the UK, but I think in Europe, in the European Union, it's 100, 200, 500 euro notes. Gamble. Either way, splitting by the actor could be a great option to reveal new functionality. And then we come to what I call the gold standard, acceptance criteria splitting. When we write these stories, when we build them in those formulas that a lot of people use, that idea of acceptance criteria, that idea of sort of business rules, business functionality, usability, etc., those aspects or attributes can be great points in your story to split. They're nice discrete chunks already that you've come up with to say your user story is possibly a bit testable, and so you can use those to chunk your story up. That can be a great way to do this. It's actually, I think, possibly the one major method I use the most. Just be careful. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if all you do is acceptance criteria splitting and it's the only type you know, if you ever get a story where an acceptance criteria split doesn't quite work for you, you could end up being a bit stuck. So anyway, thank you for watching the video. I hope it's been useful. There are lots of other splitting techniques out there. These patterns are not exhaustive at all. There are some more in the document down there, and there are some more on the internet out there. But for me, these are some classics that have got me through my workplace and got me through my job as an Agile coach. I hope they've been useful for you. They've definitely been useful for me, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you and goodbye.